But at the same time, I think, the question that you have to ask is, what exactly this test automation really meant for? So there is a testing. I mean, we all know, no matter how confident we are, how good, we are as a programmer, we don't know for sure our code is going to work unless we test it. And so the next thing is like, why do you want to turn that test into a really the test automation? And so the real reason is you don't want to lose the code that you're using to test it. Rather, you want to repeat it, make it available on subsequent testing, right? Now, the next thing is, the code that you have written, probably it might go all the way to the production environment. That doesn't mean that it's done. And given that today's fast-paced nature of the business, everything that we build, it's a subject to change. In fact, it's a given that the code that you write, you should be able to change it easily. That is the only way you can stay agile and the nimble, which is really the need of the hour for almost every business. So the reason why you write those test automation, the reason why you want to include all the unit testing as a part of it, that tomorrow, if you're making the change in the same feature or anything, which is adjacent to it, the unit testing or, some of these tests are the only weapons that you have that is going to protect from, any kind of accidental changing. So unit testing is required for sure, almost like, on everyone understand that part. But, what Mark was saying is that the amount of the mechanics that is involved in getting everything done is quite overwhelming. And I think this is where the developers, try to escape it. Because if you're writing the unit test, you want to make sure, it's done in a unit way. It has to be very, very specific. It has to be easy, readable. And, at any given point, you should be able to make the changes easily. You should be able to maintain it. And so if the amount of effort is like too high, often people lose interest and they start asking the question, does it make any sense to make so much of an investment? Does it have enough ROI? And people don't do it.
Okay, so I think what I'm gathering from both of you, and correct me if I'm wrong, one key takeaway is that most of the code that makes it to production is more so proof of concept. You're not thinking about scale, you're not thinking about writing good code. You just want to get the feature out the door to make sure that this is a feature that we're gonna keep. Is that fair?
That is often the case, although that makes it sound a little bit more risky maybe than it is. A lot of we're all kind of wandering through the desert, wondering where the destination is. And so whether you're launching a new application or just building on top of an existing application, there's a lot of value in being able to get something out there, even if it's like only to 1% of users or to a small crowd, to get feedback, to do what one of my great mentors called dancing with the market, to figure out what is the right approach, what provides the most value for people. And so if you're maintaining 100% test coverage on something that you're not sure is even the right fit, that's the downside of shift left, is it's adding a lot of expense up front. And one of the great things that software allows us to do is be agile, whereas we can't do that in other industries so easily. Nothing in the physical world, for sure.
So that does remind me of a story that Rishi was telling me about how in his former position as the CTO, he's constantly had to balance dealing with the sales team going, "Hey, Rishi, like we need this feature out the door like yesterday," and then Rishi putting pressure on his team, "Hey, we need the feature, but we have to make sure that it's coded correctly. There's no bugs. We can push it out, and there's proper testing against it."
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. You're right. And just to add to what Mark said, I think, it has become a nature of our business that we start with the POC, we write that code and we just test it out. We share with all the stakeholders, we get their buy-in, and then we start building on top of it. This is the model of the agile methodology, that you build something and then you always iterate on top of it. And it's a very hard to figure out that, when certain product has moved out of the POC stage to the real production, it is getting, heavily used by the many of the customers. And I think this is where the quality becomes, very, very challenging. So either, the product becomes of the mediocre quality, or you have built on the product with, that you are having a hard time iterating on it because there are a lot of risk associated with it. So, when it becomes really serious, when it's really the production product, then productionalized version of the product, then, obviously, you cannot get away from building, plenty of the test suite and, addressing almost all the aspects of the product, right? And I think that's where it's very hard to change the way you're doing it. It's not easy to change the habit where you're always making the changes and putting things in the production and you're trying it out, but you're not adding enough the test automation. So it requires a very significant effort to change that habit. And so the example that you were sharing, that I was sharing with Amit earlier, that I had more than 200 engineers under me, and they're always working on a certain changes. And it gets to the point where executives are often asked this question that, hey, I have built this feature and what should we do? Should we push this code and it will reach to the production right away? Or should we take another week or maybe the 2 weeks, which will, which we can use it to, write a lot of test automation and then get it done. And then, you're always under pressure to, deliver because your customers are waiting, your sales team is waiting, they want to get the deal done, as early as possible. And you're always making a choice. But again, it's no one's fault. It's definitely not developer's fault. Who is coming and asking you a question. What should I do? It's not engineering leaders' fault. Who are constantly rationalizing that. Okay, let's just go ahead. Let's deploy this code in the production environment, and maybe we can come back in a couple of weeks and we can just try to add the test automation. But the reality is that it has. We all need to strike the right balance. Otherwise, things can quickly get out of control, and then there is a bigger challenge in the production environment. You will start losing the customer. Everything will fall into the chaos. And so that is the challenge that we'll have to deal with. Where how do we transition from this POC kind of model to really the serious the productionalized version of the product that has to happen, where you start taking control over the quality.
So I know that we have some really strong talking points for this workshop, and a lot of people joined because they want to probably obviously answer the question, how do I get 100% test coverage? But before we jump into that, I do want to ask kind of an existential question, and it might be the elephant in the room, where I think maybe some of the junior people might be asking this. I'm definitely asking it. I think some of the senior people have an answer for this. But the question is why do we even have to unit test? Why do we have to eat our vegetables? What's the point?
The biggest value for me is it's an early warning system. When you change something, you can know if you've broken something very quickly. The best examples are some of these frameworks that literally, as you change your code, automatically rerun the unit tests in the background and provide you feedback in seconds, whether or not you've broken some far-flung piece of functionality that you weren't even thinking about. Any application that is substantial and in production is going to develop and grow complexity, features that you're working on one thing, you might not be thinking about all the ways in which that component is used. And unit testing helps you discover immediately when you've run afoul of some use case you weren't thinking of.
Yeah. In the software engineering, if you're making the change, it's very hard to figure out every possible the side effect that can happen because of the change. And I think this is where the unit testing becomes extremely important. I always do this comparison with the strongly typed language versus something which is more like the scripting. The advantage that you get with the strongly typed language that the moment if you start making changes, you get the error at the compile time itself. And so the question is do you want to deal with the errors at the runtime, which is maybe 100 times more expensive than dealing with the error on the compile time? The unit testing is an early warning. It gives you the error right away, and so that you can fix, and it becomes easier to deal with it.
Yeah. So Scott has a good point. He said the earlier a problem is found, the cheaper it is to fix. It's kind of like that old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
You guys haven't heard of that? So I think that the theme that keeps popping out to me here is that it's more of a scale paradigm. If you're a 2-person team, and you're an early startup, your code base can probably get away with not unit testing. But if you're a 4,000 person team on a 20-year-old code base, the unit tests are a way to help you guys, not lose your sanity. So it's more of a not doing it almost sounds selfish, and doing it sounds like, hey, it's part of a greater good. Is that fair?
Yeah, scale is definitely a dimension to it. I mean, anybody who's ever started a new job, that first change that you make is a really nervous moment if there isn't really good unit testing that you can rely on, because you're starting out with no context, but maybe plenty of skill, and that's when you're most dangerous. So it's definitely useful in a large scale team. But I will also say, even on small projects, sometimes small projects reach a level of complexity where you're not always in the headspace of 100% of the code all the time. You might have written a feature 2 years ago that's very important, but you haven't had to touch it because it was executed well. And then all of a sudden, some new requirement causes a paradigm shift that affects everything. Or maybe you've reached a level of popularity now to where you have to start scaling out, and fundamentally the architecture you were using is not appropriate anymore. Those kind of major refactorings, even if a one developer project, boy, is it reassuring to have 100% unit test coverage when you have to go through that.
Yeah. Yeah. There is one more thing. I think, even if you are a 1% or 2% team, the unit testing is one of those areas where, if you don't pay attention from early on, it's very hard to do it later on. It's very, very hard, because, the testing is not about just writing the test, but it's also making sure the source code that you have written, it's designed in a way, or, it has a right, logical architecture.
As we roll into the core team, this next sprint, which kicked off this morning, is all around.
And so basically, like, if you have the code, which is not really, the unit testable, then it's not easy to do it later on. And so, unit testing is definitely, it will help you, retain the higher quality, but it also forces you to make the right design choices when you're writing the code in the very first time. And so it's equally, important from that perspective.
All right, so this has been on my mind, and I've heard this chatter before about this whole like shift left movement. Like, I was talking to the CTO of this really big media company on the East Coast, and this is like 10 years ago, and he was telling me, hey, our software engineers, if they write it, they have to deploy it, and if it breaks production, they have to fix it. So you also are responsible for monitoring. And that was the first time where I was like, whoa, like your software engineers are getting pulled into a lot of areas that historically they weren't really part of. But now you have this whole shift left movement that's even asking software engineers, okay, you write it, you got to write the unit test against it as well. Where I feel like historically in large organizations, it was like you write your code, but then you got a QA team that's writing the code against it. So it's kind of like when you're in college and you write an essay, right, for your English class, and like the night before you're trying to proofread it, and it's like it's all gibberish. You're so like cognitively like blind to everything because you were like spending 2 months writing this paper, but then now you got to proofread it, and like you cannot proofread this thing. No way. So it's like, should you be the person to even be proofreading your own essay? Maybe you should give your paper to somebody else and then you proofread their paper. And I feel like writing unit tests are almost the same thing. It's like, you shouldn't be writing unit tests against your own code, because you're going to have this like cognitive blind spot where the logic in your code that you should be testing against is probably going to slip through, right? And a lot of these points were shared with me by Rishi.
Yeah. I think, that is true. I think, sometimes, if you're reviewing your own code, you often have the cognitive blind spot, you don't detect it. And so, in the back in days, it used to be the dev as a separate team, there was a QA team, QA has a bit of a different mindset. If you look at the developers, they are always happy, very, very optimistic people. If you look at the QA, they have a more of a paranoid sort of mindset, they are always looking at the different loopholes, where things can start breaking. They're always looking at those edge cases, the boundary condition, the erroneous condition where, things can go wrong. And so now, with the shift left movement, probably, it empowers the developers that now they can do everything. Like they can, write the code. They can also work on the QA aspect. They can have all the unit testing, but at the same time, it creates a challenge to them. It's a sort of, superhuman fallacy where they are expecting the developers to wear the multiple hat. They need to bring this QA mindset, the QA skill set, And that is a bit of a challenge. I think this is where, maybe we can just talk a bit later, but something more is needed to help the developers. And I think the AI is an amazing place where it can bring the QA mindset, it can work alongside the developers to address some of the things that, they're typically done by the QA, earlier.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. The superhuman fallacy. It's like the expectation that you're supposed to be taking on more and more responsibilities, but it's like, dude, you just can't. And at some point, something has to give. And you see this pattern repeat itself over and over again. By the way, it's not just with software engineers. I mean, I am a marketer now professionally for almost 10 years, and I can tell you, as a marketer, seeing my peers, very creative people, the pressure on them to be data driven and almost become data scientists and data analysts. Like, they have to learn SQL now, and they have to learn, Python to be able to actually, analyze their own data. It's like, dude, they have literally no time left anymore to think about strategy and be creative with their marketing. So I heard this good metaphor where it's like, there are two types of people. There are librarians and there are authors, right? And those two types of brains are what makes a library. And I feel like software engineers, actually, before I continue, I am curious with the crowd, maybe a show of hands, or you can maybe chat or leave a comment in the Zoom chat. How many people here are full-time QA, and how many of you are software engineers, full-time production developers who are responsible for their own tests? And you can just leave some comments, quick little poll, then I'll come back to the chat here in a little bit. So there is another elephant in the room that's starting to stand out, which is like, well, if QA is no longer writing the tests and software engineers are more responsible for it, or if QA can't handle writing unit tests because it's becoming too much, what has to give? And I know Rishi has the answer to that. It's obviously AI.
Yeah.
But why is AI writing unit tests better than a human?
I think there are many reasons. I think the number one reason is that as a human, when you give this responsibility, then you are at the mercy of the individual developers. Everyone has a different experience level, they have a different skill set, and so the test that you're writing, it might not follow the best practices. And so you can easily expect the inconsistent test throughout your code base, right? That is number one. And the second thing is that even if people do have the right skill set, I think it's extremely the tedious process. It easily takes like 20 to 40% of the developer's time, because the test code is often probably like 2 to 10 times more than the original code that was written for the feature development or for the enhancement.
Sorry, you said 2 to 10 times, like 10x?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, so amount of the code that you end up writing for the unit testing is a lot more than the code you're trying to test. And I think that's what overwhelms most of the developers. On top of it, these codes are quite repetitive in nature. And so it just overall, it creates a lot of frustration in the developers because they have to spend so much time. And I think this is where the AI is a lot smarter. I think it can understand the code base, it can understand all the possible branching conditions, the possible edge cases, the boundary condition, and it can it can help the developers simply write all the code instead of they spending the time. And I think this is the biggest reason, probably, like the AI is a much better place than the developers are writing those tests themselves. Developers can still own it, they can still review it, they can do it, but they should definitely take the help from the AI.
So Rishi shared a very important point with me about how a lot of organizations, they measure the efficacy, or not efficacy, they measure coverage by, well, no, coverage itself is the unit of measurement of your unit tests. The problem with that is that you could still have bad unit tests and have high coverage. So what ends up happening, and you probably heard the old adage, when the metric itself becomes the target, it's no longer a metric, which is true in like most places. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, Mark. I know that you're also a VP of engineering today. Do you use coverage as a metric?
I do, and it is imperfect for the reasons that you're stating. What I have found, though, is that the difference between 99% coverage and 100% coverage isn't 1%. It's like a lot more valuable, because if you don't have 100% coverage, it's very easy for code coverage to degrade over time as people get lazy. It's very easy to see, like, hey, did my changes, are they still 100% or did it get less? But if you're like 85%, well, no one's going to bark when it becomes 84%, 83%, 80%. And eventually you're missing whole swaths of the application. So sometimes getting to 100% coverage can be tedious and annoying. But if you have a system that's truly mission critical and complex and you're afraid of breaking it, there is a lot more value in being at 100% than at 99%. But here we have the big cost trade-off. It's not easy to do that. And, the more that you put on individuals, single person, smaller teams, each of those people works more efficiently. Mythical Man Month taught us that the more people you add, you do not linearly increase the productivity. But small teams have their limits. I mean, no matter, unless you can make me infinitely productive, I can't do more than 100 people could do. So
yes, 9 people cannot make a baby in 1 month.
Exactly.
You can't bake a cake faster by turning up the heat.
So the only solution we have to that is ideally smaller teams with much better tools gives us the best of both worlds. We have the agility of not having too many cooks in the kitchen, but we have the productivity of many different hands on the keyboard, or even diverse outlooks on how something should work. I think that's one of the things that's lost with people writing their own unit test, is the natural skepticism that a QA team would have. The only problem is having a QA team costs money. So what's one of the nice things I think about the future of AI is that it brings back that objectivity of an outside party testing your code without significant additional costs of an outside team.
So the old it's actually a new adage now. It's you're not being replaced by AI. You're being replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI. And I think that's the perfect transition to Rishi for us to get a demo of Sapient. If you have a moment, I'd love for the audience to take a look at what it looks like for AI to write your unit test using Sapient. And while Rishi's getting set up here, I do want to share with everybody on the line that Rishi has been. I asked him, and he said yes to offer a free license to everybody who's on the call for Sapient. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, shoot me an email. I'll put it down in the chat. And if you're on the call right now, just mention the free license and I will get you provision. So congrats to all of you who've made it this far.
Yep. Hey, Omid, are you able to see my screen?
I can, yeah.
Do you see the IntelliJ window? Is that correct?
Yep, we see your code and I see the beautiful blue icon.
Very good. It's awesome. Again, the unit testing, it is important. I think everyone understand. I know, what we're saying. Like, you should probably try to get 100%, because if you're anything less than that, whether it's 80% and the 90%, then it becomes a subjective that what is the last 10% that is left out, right? AI is definitely a way to go that can not only, help you save your time, make you more productive, but also it brings this QA mindset, which is not very natural to the software developers, as we were talking earlier. The Sapient.ai, we have the unit testing platform, and so we are available in the JetBrains marketplace. And so, here is a sample project that I have it for the demo purpose. It's a very simple. There is a user service, that has, the few methods. One of the methods is valid user that takes the user ID and the password as a parameter, and then it goes through the few steps. Really simple 10 lines of the code, really harmless code. But it goes through the few instructions and eventually return the value true and false, right? But if I have to start bringing the QA mindset, then I'll have to start writing the test. What happens if the user ID is null? Then it should be throwing some exception. Else it should be going to fetch the user value from the repository. I need to write a test case where the user is probably not enabled, or user is enabled. I need to write the test cases where the password hash is matching, password hash is not matching, and so on. Right. So typically, as a developer, I can probably get started with some positive test cases. There is a value using the password scenario, and I write the code for it. Very soon, I will turn towards this invalid password or the disabled user. Some of the other edge cases and the boundary conditions. Now, as you could see, this was a very simple 10 line of the code, but then, if I start producing the unit test for every possible scenarios, it easily turns into more than hundreds of lines of the code. And this is the reality. This is what we were talking about, that the amount of effort that is needed for the unit testing is quite high. And this is where the developers, end up giving up. So, come to the Sapient world, it's available in the marketplace. I have this plugin installed in my IntelliJ environment. And so let me use UI. The Sapient.ai provides some multiple ways that you can invoke this unit testing functionality. Again, the goal is that in everything that we do is very open and transparent to the developers. So you can clearly see, what are all the different test cases that are applicable for different scenarios. You can, jump, into the individual test cases. You can see those input, output parameters, and as your code is more complex, then there are more number of dependencies that will come into the play. And then it becomes very important that you create a layer of isolation from the other dependencies. And this tool automatically does it for you. In fact, I can use this tool to generate the test data for me, which includes some of the mocking and the stopping behavior needed to isolate from the other layers. And I can use the tool to generate the code for me. And so now I have this code, again, it's following all the best practices. The topic that you touched upon briefly, Amit, was, the coverage, the code coverage itself doesn't mean everything, because the coverage has to be backed up with the right set of, the validation. If you're invoking the function, it may increase the coverage number, but if you don't have the right set of assertion, then it's not good. And I think this is where the AI does. AI covers all the aspect of the unit testing, and it's following all the best practices. And so let me just go back and generate the code for all the possible test cases. So let me do it. And so now I have all the different test cases. All of them have been generated. I can save it, and so probably run a test, and it can provide the quick result.
So there's two things that are happening here automatically, I suppose. One is that Sapient has determined all of the different exit points in the code. So it's like, hey, here are the different ways you should test against this. And then when you click on generate test code, then it actually creates the test for you.
Yep.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
So it's like there's two very difficult pieces of logic that you as a QA or even as a software engineer have the responsibility is when you look at a class or a method that you're testing against, you got to really understand that code to know where it's exiting, and then write a test against that scenario.
And all the exit points, it looks at all the different code blocks, and if some QAs there in the audience, they will probably appreciate the fact that you come up with a test case scenario where with the minimal effort you cover the more number of the code blocks. And so it automatically does certain optimization where it comes up with the right set of test data that will touch as many different the pieces of the code blocks, and so that amount of the code generated is probably less, which means there is less liability, but at the same time it's addressing all the exit points.
So what happens if we have some QA engineers on the call? What happens if they download the plugin and they start using Sapient, but the developers wrote really poor code, and now they're stuck having to write unit tests, whether it's manual or using Sapient? How does Sapient help in that situation? I know I'm kind of feeding you a question, but I already know the answer.
Yeah. So I think this plugin is available as a freemium version. Anyone can download from the IntelliJ marketplace. And this plugin will look at it will inspect the code base, and then you can use it, and it can start generating the test code. I'm sorry, did I answer your question? What is the exact question?
So if the code that I'm testing against is just poorly written code, what kind of feedback does Sapient give?
Yeah. So the Sapient look at the code, and there is a notion called the code intelligence. And so if the code is not written well, then it will warn that, okay, this code is not testable. And here are some ideas that you can do to refactor the code. So it will detect if the code is of not the good quality.
Got it.
So
there is
again,
like a check and balance there.
Correct, 100%. There is. Now, in regards to the code coverage, one of the biggest challenges that we all come across is how do you maintain the high code coverage? And so writing the unit test could be harder, but maintaining it is like a lot more harder than doing it the very first time. And so our tool is designed so that it will understand the changes that are made in the code. And so here is an example where I made the change that, hey, this user, there is a null pointer exception as one of the possibility, and so probably it needs to be handled. And so let me add the code if user input null, return false, right? So I'm just making the change in the code. And so it's a very common, as a developer, we are always making the changes, and that results into the new set of the test cases, or sometimes some of the test cases become obsolete, and then there is a need for someone to reconcile the source code and reconcile the test code, and make sure the test that you have it is really up to date. And so the tool is designed that the people can use it on the everyday basis. So don't just use it to generate the unit test the very first time. That you're always making changes, and this tool is capable of understanding the diff in your source code, and it's going to make the right recommendations so that you are always on top of the Right. So yeah, I think there was a new test cases that got added, I think, and this tool is available as a free version. You can use it for the unit testing. You can also use it for some of the integration testing, that you have in the code. This is available for every developers.
Awesome. Thank you, Rishi. Thank you for that. So just another reminder to everyone in the audience: if you do want a free license, we are offering it to you exclusively for everyone who's in attendance right now on the call. Please take advantage. If you want to shoot me an email, it's omid@sapient.ai, or if you just drop your email in the chat, I can also shoot you an email as well. Johanna, you asked a question that does it work with IntelliJ? Yes, we have a plugin for IntelliJ today. We're working on a VS Code plugin as well. Do you develop in IntelliJ, or are you using VS Code? VS Code. Okay, that's fair. Are you doing Java in VS Code? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Ofer is also on VS Code closure. Got it. Okay. Yeah. Good feedback. So I do want to also give an opportunity for Mark to demo a really cool piece of software that he's actually built recently.
Thank you, Omid.
If you haven't heard of it yet, you're about to see it for the first time. It's recently launched, actually, on our last workshop, and I think I'm very excited to have Mark also demo it here.
Yeah, so I created a new thing that is only tangentially related to Makaru, and it's called FireAway. Let me show you. So FireAway is basically, think about it as like ChatGPT for your own private data. And so there's a bunch of different potential uses for it, and I'm trying to figure out which are actually going to gain the most traction. So I originally created FireAway as a way to add a AI chatbot to a documentation website. It's like, you're creating a new product, you write all the docs. Can you give your users a chatbot that can help them solve problems for that particular product? And so if you go to makaru.com today, FireAway is actually in use. The thing in the lower right-hand corner, move my Zoom window out of the way, is like, if I go ahead and ask it, like, how can I reference a column in a data set within a formula, then it has crawled the Makaru docs and is answering with answers that are specific to those docs and up to date, to the latest version of the website. So the problem with ChatGPT is training those models are very expensive. So you probably are not going to train your own, even if you're a big company. And ChatGPT is only trained on the internet as of some time ago, a year ago, a year and a half ago, something like that. So if you're putting out a product that's new, you're at this like gigantic disadvantage in that any competing products that have been out there and have been indexed by any of these large language models, they now have built this kind of network effect of it's very easy to get answers out of ChatGPT around a product that exists. But if you're brand new, the ChatGPT can't help you. So I originally created FireAway with that in mind, that it would empower people creating new products to not be so far behind in the experience that they can give their users, because they would be able to give a ChatGPT-like experience even when the product is new. But interestingly, my wife is studying for her MBA, and so she's been using FireAway to help with her homework, let's just say. And the nice thing is it's a very progressive MBA class in Estonia Business School. And so she's been very open with her professors about it. And part of the class is like to bootstrap a business. And so she's trying to bootstrap FireAway as a business, and has been allowed to use FireAway to do her homework for her as part of the learning process. And so on the first exam that she got a 94 out of 100 by just feeding the textbook into FireAway and then feeding the questions into FireAway. So I don't have a textbook handy, but I want to show you how easy it is to do this if you're using it kind of as a student or somebody that needs a virtual tutor, which is why now if you come to FireAway today, you'll see a lot of language around AI tutoring, because I think I'm going to try to launch it first with like the student use case in mind. So if you sign in or sign up, you can see all of the tutors that you've created. Here's the one for Makaru that's up and running on Makaru's website. In addition to embedding a tutor within a website, you can also use it entirely within FireAway. So I'm going to go create a new virtual tutor, and I'm going to give it my washing machine manual, my Miele washing machine manual. So I'll click that, and then it's going to go and crawl that PDF and basically teach the AI how to use it. So now I can ask it any question about my washing machine. So if I want to do something like, do I need to separate my laundry before washing? It'll go ahead and answer specifically based on that washing machine. And, it's pulling all the answers directly from the doc. And so if you go in here and you look at what it's actually done, when you upload that PDF, it's breaking it out into pages. It's creating what are called embeddings for all of them in AI. And then when you type a question, it does a search that goes and feeds the relevant documentation into the large language model so that you get an answer based on that specific documentation. So this is the new tool, FireAway, and it's free to use. So anybody can go and sign up now. I think eventually I'll probably charge some nominal fee, like $5 a month for it. And then for some maybe more expensive enterprise use cases is where I'll try to monetize it more. But for now, as I'm just looking for feedback, anybody can hop in and use it to their heart's content. So thank you.
So the last workshop that we held, thank you, Mark. If you're listening, the last workshop that we held, we offered free licenses for Sapient and for FireAway, and a lot of people took advantage of it. So I don't know how much longer we'll keep doing this, but I'm advocating for the people. And so I was able to get free licenses on this workshop as well. So thank you for everyone who left email addresses. I'm going to send you an email after this workshop for your Sapient license. But take advantage of FireAway, take advantage of Sapient. I think it's a killer opportunity. I would love to open the floor for any questions if anybody has for our two distinguished speakers. You're speaking to one of the greatest, in my opinion, engineering minds that I've come across. Both have led huge engineering teams and have built extremely successful products. So this is a chance for you to pick their brain.
Scott has his hand up. Hey, Scott.
Hi, guys. If I'm being honest, I'm just curious as to wait, what am I going to ask? Oh, yeah. How we get a hold of the recording? Because, again, I just had to step out during the crux of the whole dang meeting. So just want to make sure I'm going to get the recording somehow.
I will. Yeah. So there's a couple ways. I'm gonna drop a link to the workshop. So by the end of today, the recording will be on there, so you can access it that way. I'll also send a follow-up email to everyone who registered with access to the recording. If you want to be lazy, just look for that email. It'll be in your inbox by this week. Oh, and then you can always access Sapient.ai. Go to workshops, and all of our workshops are uploaded. So you can always access the previous workshop if you did miss it. But the free licenses are not offered to them. So you have to join live to get the free license, by the way. Good question, Scott. Anybody else? Any questions? All right. Well, for those of you who are shy, feel free to reach out via email if you'd like. Otherwise, I can't thank you both enough. Thank you, Rishi. Thank you, Mark, for your time. I hope it was beneficial for everybody who did join. And if you did join, thank you so much for your time and for your questions and your contributions and your attention.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.